He, a reclusive and disillusioned tycoon, viewed everyone with suspicion. She, a discreet and humble cleaning lady, used to being invisible. One night at work, a moment of his vulnerability forces her to act, and Helen, with her calm and insight, is the only one capable of helping him. Introducing herself, her peculiar humility. "I'm just the cleaning lady, sir," profoundly affects Alexander. Confronted with her authenticity, he observes her not as an employee, but as a woman. Seeing the dignity and purity in her gaze, he takes her hand and in a voice hoarse with emotion replies, "No, Helen, you're not just the cleaning lady. To me, you are everything." Watch this story to the end. You will be surprised by this story. If you like stories of love, romance, subscribe to this channel, leave your comment. We post videos like this every day. Continuing. The early morning darkness still cloaked the skyscrapers of Manhattan when Helen Silver pushed her cleaning cart through the silent hallway of the 32nd floor of Blackwood Tower. Her footsteps echoed softly on the polished marble, a sound she had learned to muffle over the 3 years working in that temple of glass and steel. At 26, Helen knew every corner of that building better than her own apartment in Washington Heights, a small studio she barely afforded and could barely fit her twin bed. Her Navy uniform, always impeccable despite being in its 3rd year of use, had a discreet embroidery on the chest. Silver Cleaning Services. Her Aunt Connie's company, who gave her the opportunity when Helen needed it most, after her father's death and her mother's hospitalization for heart problems. Every penny of her salary went to her mother's treatment or to the installments of the associate's degree in business administration she was pursuing on Saturdays, fueling a dream that seemed as distant as the stars still shining outside. Helen stopped before the double mahogany doors with the gold plaque. Alexander Blackwood, CEO. Even after cleaning that office hundreds of times, she still felt a flutter in her stomach. Not because of the man who never noticed her, but because of what he represented. A world of power and possibilities that she observed through the glass, like someone admiring an aquarium without ever touching the water. She checked her watch. 4:15 a.m. The CEO always left around 2, after another 16-hour day building his technological empire. Helen sighed and entered the code on the electronic panel. The door opened to reveal not the empty office she expected, but the silhouette of a man bent over the desk, illuminated only by the bluish light of multiple monitors. Alexander Blackwood was there, his dark hair disheveled, his white shirt with the sleeves rolled up and his tie loosened. Papers scattered across the table like pieces of a puzzle too complex for any mortal to decipher. Helen froze in the doorway. In 3 years, she had never crossed paths with him during the night shift. The protocol was clear. If any executive was in the building, cleaning should be postponed. But no one had warned her, and the security system had confirmed that the floor was clear. She tried to retreat silently, but the cart emitted a treacherous squeak. Alexander raised his head sharply, and their eyes met. Helen felt her blood run cold. At 38, Alexander Blackwood was even more imposing in person than in the photos in the financial newspapers. His steel-colored eyes seemed to pierce her soul, analyzing her like one of the complex codes of his software. "I'm sorry, Mr. Blackwood," Helen murmured, lowering her gaze. "I didn't know you were still here. I'll come back later." But before she could walk away, Alexander stood up unsteadily, raising his hand to his forehead. The stress of the last few months, the federal investigations into anti-competitive practices, the betrayal of Marcus, his partner and best friend who had attempted a corporate coup, the constant pressure from investors, all collapsed on him like an avalanche. His legs buckled and he leaned heavily on the desk. Helen saw the most powerful man in the country doubling over in pain and, on impulse, dropped the cart and ran to him. "Mr. Blackwood, are you all right?" Alexander tried to focus on the worried eyes before him. A young woman with delicate features framed by brown hair held in a simple bun. There was no artifice in her expression, only a genuine concern that he had not seen in years. "I need," he murmured, trying to straighten up, but dizziness knocked him back into the armchair. Helen didn't hesitate. She picked up the phone on the desk. "Who are you calling?" Alexander asked, alarmed. "For medical emergency, sir. You may be having a heart attack." "No!" Alexander grabbed her wrist with more force than he intended. "There can't be a scandal. The media, the shareholders. Helen stared at him for a moment, understanding. She put the phone back on the hook and went to the mini-fridge, returning with a bottle of water. "Drink slowly," she ordered, with a firm gentleness that Alexander did not expect from an employee. "When was the last time you ate something?" Alexander tried to remember, and realized he couldn't. Helen opened her simple bag and took out a sandwich wrapped in aluminum foil. "It's just bread and cheese," she said, offering half. "But it will help." At that moment, in the silent Manhattan dawn, between the woman in the blue uniform and the man in the $3,000 suit, something shifted, a microscopic crack in the wall that separated two worlds. Alexander chewed the sandwich in silence, surprised by the hunger he didn't realize he had. Helen's simple gesture, sharing her own meal with a stranger, disconcerted him more than any complex business strategy. When was the last time someone genuinely cared about his well-being without ulterior motives? "What's your name?" he asked, studying her face with an intensity that made Helen look away. "Helen Silver, sir. I've been on the cleaning crew for 3 years." 3 years, Alexander repeated, as if processing an impossible fact. "And I've never seen you before." "I work the night shift, sir, from 2 to 6. You're usually gone when I get here." The simple answer carried an uncomfortable truth. Helen knew his routine, but to him, she was invisible. A shadow that took care of his space while he slept, erasing traces of his long journeys so that he would find everything perfect the next morning. "Why are you working so late tonight?" Helen asked, carefully putting the aluminum foil back in her bag with a thriftiness that did not go unnoticed. Alexander hesitated. He didn't usually explain his decisions to employees, but something in the sincerity of those eyes disarmed him. "Problems with the TechSouth acquisition. My partner—" He stopped abruptly. Why was he telling this to a cleaning lady? Helen sensed his reluctance and stood up. "I'll let you get back to work. I can clean this floor tomorrow." "Wait." The word came out before Alexander could think. Helen stopped, but didn't turn around. "Thank you for the sandwich, and for not calling the emergency." "You don't have to thank me, Mr. Blackwood. Anyone would have done the same." But Alexander knew that wasn't true. In his world of corporate backstabbing and calculated relationships, no one would have done the same. Not even Marcus, who in 20 years of friendship had never shown a fraction of the genuine concern that this stranger had shown in a few minutes. Helen left, pushing her cart, and Alexander stood watching the door through which she had disappeared. The office, which moments before seemed like a safe bunker, now felt suffocating. For the first time in years, he questioned whether he was living or just surviving. In the following days, Alexander found himself arriving later at the office, pretending to himself that it was to avoid traffic. But deep down, he hoped to cross paths with Helen again. When that didn't happen, he started inventing excuses to work later, but she seemed to have returned to her normal schedule. A week later, Marcia, his secretary, brought a report on the cleaning company. "Mr. Blackwood, I received a complaint about the quality of service on the 32nd floor. The employee Helen Silver has been missing quite a bit of work. Perhaps we should consider replacing her." Alexander felt something clench in his chest. "What kind of absences?" "According to the supervisor, she has been arriving late and leaving early in recent weeks. Apparently, she has family problems." That night, Alexander stayed in the office until 4 in the morning. When Helen arrived, he immediately noticed that something was wrong. She looked exhausted, with deep circles under her eyes, and her hands trembled slightly as she pushed the cart. "Helen." She startled at seeing him. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm sorry, I didn't know—" "Are you all right?" The question came out with more concern than he intended to show. Helen hesitated, clearly struggling between politeness and exhaustion. "Yes, sir. Just a little tired." But Alexander saw beyond the words. He saw the way she leaned on the cart, how she avoided his gaze, how her clothes, always impeccable, were slightly rumpled. "Marcia told me you've been missing work." Helen's face paled. My mother is in the hospital. Sometimes I need to be with her during the tests. But I promise it won't affect my work, Mr. Blackwood. Please don't fire me. I need this job. The raw vulnerability in her voice hit Alexander like a punch to the stomach. She wasn't asking for favors or trying to manipulate him. She was simply being honest about her desperate situation. Which hospital? New York Presbyterian. She has heart problems and... Alexander interrupted her. Tomorrow night, I want you to bring all her medical documents, reports, tests, everything. Helen stared at him, confused. Sir, just bring them. That night, alone in his office, Alexander did something he hadn't done in years. He used his power for something other than profit. He called Dr. Edward Miles, the best cardiologist in New York and a personal friend. Edward, I need a favor. When Helen arrived the next night with a yellowed folder full of papers, she found Alexander waiting for her with an expression she couldn't decipher. There was something different in his eyes, an intensity that made her feel as if she were on the edge of a precipice, not knowing whether she would be pushed or saved. Alexander studied the documents spread across his desk with the same concentration he dedicated to the most complex contracts. Helen remained standing, restless, wringing her hands as she watched the CEO analyze her mother's medical history as if it were a financial report. Connie Silver, 54 years old, dilated cardiomyopathy, Alexander murmured, flipping through the exams. She's been on the transplant list for 2 years. You didn't need to worry about this, Helen said softly. I only brought it because you asked, but Dr. Edward Miles will examine your mother tomorrow at Mount Sinai Hospital. Alexander interrupted, raising his eyes to her. He's the best cardiologist in the country. I've already scheduled the appointment. Helen stood motionless, as if she hadn't processed the words. Mr. Blackwood, I can't afford a private doctor. The company plan only covers... You're not asking. I'm offering. But why? The question came out in a desperate whisper. Why? Would you do this for me? Alexander stood up, walking to the window that showed Manhattan still sleeping. The question echoed in his mind because he himself didn't know the answer. Or maybe he knew and didn't want to admit it. You helped me when I needed it. Now it's my turn. I only gave you half a sandwich. You gave me more than you imagine. The silence stretched between them, charged with something that neither of them knew how to name. Helen approached hesitantly. I can't accept your charity, Mr. Blackwood. It's not charity. Alexander turned to face her. It's an investment. In what? In someone who's worth it. The words hung in the air. Helen felt something stir in her chest, a dangerous emotion that she couldn't allow herself to have. Men like Alexander Blackwood were not interested in women like her. That was a fundamental law of the universe. You barely know me. I know enough. Alexander took a step toward her. I know you work 3 jobs to pay for your mother's treatment. I know you're taking college classes on Saturdays. I know you save half of your sandwich for lunch the next day, but you still shared it with me. Helen recoiled, frightened by how much he had discovered about her life. Did you investigate me? I didn't need to investigate. I just paid attention. The revelation left her vulnerable and exposed. For 3 years, she had been invisible, and suddenly she felt naked under his penetrating gaze. I should go. I still have 5 floors to clean. Helen. The way he said her name made something clench in her stomach. Why are you so afraid to accept help? The question touched on something deep and painful. Helen closed her eyes for a moment. Because nothing in life is free. There's always a price, and people like me can never afford it. People like you? Poor, invisible, disposable. The bitterness in her voice surprised them both. Alexander saw beyond the facade of resignation that she showed the world. Who made you believe that? Helen hesitated, but something in his expression, an understanding that seemed to come from a similar place of pain, made her speak. My father was a doorman in a building on the Upper East Side. He worked there 15 years, always punctual, always dedicated. When he got sick, the residents held a collection to help with the medicine. Her voice lowered. After he died, I found out they were deducting the money for charity from his salary, month after month. He never told anyone. Alexander felt something break inside him. The casual cruelty of the elite he knew so well, the hypocrisy of people who thought they were generous while sucking the dignity out of others. Helen, that's why I know your help comes at a price. I just don't know what it is yet. What if I told you it doesn't have a price at all? Then I'd say you're lying. Men like you don't do anything for no reason. Men like me? She faced him with a courage she didn't know she possessed. Rich, powerful, used to getting everything they want. Alexander laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. You think I get everything I want? Don't you? For a moment, Alexander considered telling her about Marcus, about the betrayal that had destroyed him from the inside, about how he had discovered that his best friend, the man he considered a brother, had tried to sell confidential information to competitors. About how Isabel, his ex-fiancée, had chosen Marcus and the dirty money instead of the future they had planned together. About how he had learned that in the world of the rich, there were no friends, only temporary partners. But instead, he simply said, "Not always." Helen saw something break in his expression, a vulnerability that he was trying to hide behind the mask of control. "Accept the medical appointment," Alexander said, changing the subject. "At least talk to Dr. Miles. Your mother deserves a second opinion." Helen knew she should refuse, that accepting would cross a dangerous line. But the image of her mother languishing on the public healthcare waiting list was stronger than her prudence. And then? What will be the price of this generosity? Alexander stared at her for a long moment. "The only thing I want in return is for you to stop working until 6 in the morning. Twice a week, finish at 4. Have coffee with me." Why? Because in the last 20 years, you're the first person who treats me like a human being, not like Alexander Blackwood, the CEO. He paused. And because I have the impression that you also need someone who treats you as more than just the cleaning lady. Helen felt the ground move beneath her feet. It was a simple proposal, but they both knew there was nothing simple about it. It was an invitation to enter a world that could destroy her, offered by a man who could be her salvation or her ruin. "Just coffee?" she asked, her voice almost inaudible. "Just coffee," Alexander confirmed, but his eyes promised much more. 3 weeks had passed since Helen started having coffee with Alexander on Wednesdays and Fridays. What had started as formal conversations about work and family had evolved into discussions about dreams, fears, and life stories that they both kept as secrets. Alexander discovered that Helen voraciously read books borrowed from the public library, while Helen was fascinated by the stories of how he had built his technological empire from a rented room at the age of 20. On Friday night, March 15th, everything changed. Helen arrived at the office with her eyes swollen from crying. Dr. Miles had given the diagnosis. Her mother needed urgent heart surgery, but the public healthcare waiting list meant at least 8 months of waiting. Time that Connie didn't have. The doctor said she might not make it past next month without the surgery, Helen murmured, her hands trembling as she held the cup of coffee that Alexander had prepared. $150,000. Maybe I can collect this money. In maybe 10 years. Alexander watched the tears she was trying to hold back. For weeks he had learned to read the micro-expressions of her face, the way she bit her lower lip when thoughtful, how her smile completely transformed her appearance. Now, seeing her broken, something awakened inside him with a force that frightened him. "I'll pay for the surgery." "Alexander, no." It was the first time she had called him by his name. "We've already talked about this. 50,000 borrowed, 100,000 as an advance on your salary. You pay it back in 5 years. My salary isn't even close to enough to... Then you're going to work for me directly, as my personal assistant." Helen stared at him, shocked. "I don't know how to do the work of an executive assistant." "You'll learn. You're smart, organized, and..." Alexander stopped, realizing he was going too far. "And what?" And I trust you. The words hung between them, loaded with meaning. Trust was something Alexander did not offer lightly, not after Marcus. Why are you doing this? Helen asked, getting up and walking to the window. Please, tell me the truth. Alexander approached from behind her, so close that he could smell the soft perfume she wore, not an expensive fragrance, but something floral and simple that was somehow more attractive than any French perfume he had ever smelled. Because when I look at you, I don't just see Helen, the cleaning lady. I see Helen, the woman who reads Toni Morrison during her break, who saves coins in a jar to buy medicine for her mother, who made me laugh for the first time in 2 years when she told me about her supervisor thinking aliens had reorganized the supply closet. He paused. I see someone who deserves more than life has given her. Helen turned to face him. They were dangerously close, so close that she could see the golden nuances in his grey eyes. And you? What do I see when I look at you? What do you see? I see a man who has built walls so high that even he doesn't remember who is on the other side of them, who works 16 hours a day to not think about how lonely he is, who uses power as a shield because someone hurt him so much that he forgot what it's like to be vulnerable. Alexander felt as if she had opened his chest and read directly into his heart. Helen. I see someone who deserves more than life has given him too. The tension between them became almost palpable. Alexander raised his hand, hesitant, lightly touching her face. Helen should have pulled away, should have remembered the differences between them, the social chasm that separated them. Instead, she closed her eyes and allowed herself to feel the warmth of his palm against her skin. This is crazy, she whispered. Completely crazy, he agreed, but didn't pull his hand away. The moment was interrupted by the sound of the office door opening abruptly. They both separated as if they had been shocked, and Helen almost tripped over the cleaning cart. Marcia entered in a hurry, with a folder in her hand. Mr. Blackwood, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I need you to sign the TechSouth contracts before the meeting tomorrow. She stopped abruptly upon seeing Helen. Oh, I didn't know the cleaning staff was still here. Marcia's tone made it clear that she had noticed something unusual in the scene. Her eyes moved between Alexander and Helen with a dangerous curiosity. Helen was helping me with some documents. Alexander lied smoothly, regaining his composure. Leave the contracts on the desk. I'll sign them first thing tomorrow. Of course, sir. Marcia placed the folder on the table, but her eyes continued to scrutinize Helen with predatory interest. Good night, Mr. Blackwood. Miss Silver, Helen murmured, lowering her gaze. When Marcia left, the atmosphere had completely changed. The magic of the moment dissipated, replaced by the stark reality of who they were and where they were. She's going to spread gossip, Helen said, picking up the cart with trembling hands. Marcia is discreet. Marcia is a professional gossip. Tomorrow the whole company will know that the CEO was alone with the cleaning lady at 5 a.m. Alexander knew she was right. Marcia had access to all the executives, all the departments. A word here, an insinuation there, and in a week the story would be distorted beyond recognition. Does that change anything? He asked. Helen stared at him, and he saw fear in her eyes, not of him, but of what this could mean for both of them. It changes everything. You have a reputation to protect. I have a job to keep. What if I told you I don't care about gossip? Then I'd say you're being naive. Men like you can survive scandals. Women like me are destroyed by them. Alexander wanted to argue, but he knew she was right. The New York business world was a minefield of gossip and intrigue. A single, rich and powerful CEO could have an affair and at most be called a playboy. A poor cleaning lady would be labeled as a gold digger, opportunist, or worse. Accept my offer, he said suddenly. Become my assistant. Officially, with a contract, decent salary, everything legal. Alexander. If they're going to talk anyway, let it at least be about something real. You working for me, growing professionally, having the chance you deserve. Helen knew she was being offered an opportunity that would change her life forever. But she also knew that by accepting it, she would be taking the first step towards a precipice from which she might not be able to return. "And us?" she asked, her voice almost inaudible. "We'll see what happens." Helen looked at Alexander, really looked, memorizing every detail of his face, the way the office light created shadows on his jawline, how his eyes seemed to hold 1,000 untold secrets. She knew that her next word would change everything. "Okay," she whispered. "I accept." Neither of them noticed that Marcia had returned and was standing outside the door, listening to every word of the conversation through the glass. In her hands, the cell phone recorded everything, and in her eyes shone the satisfaction of someone who had just discovered the scandal of the century. 2 weeks had passed since Helen officially took the position of Alexander's personal assistant. The transformation had been remarkable. She now wore discreet but well-tailored suits that Alexander had insisted on buying. Her hair was always impeccably styled, and she had developed an impressive efficiency in organizing his schedule and filtering calls. More importantly, Connie's surgery had been a success, and she was recovering well in the private room at Mount Sinai, but the constant proximity between them had intensified something that they were both trying to deny. The early morning coffees had turned into working lunches. The discussions about business had drifted into personal conversations. The glances lingered longer than was professional, and there were moments when the tension between them was almost palpable. Alexander was reviewing contracts when Helen entered his office carrying a tray with coffee and the morning newspaper. It was Tuesday, April the 2nd, and the morning sun of Manhattan was streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, creating a golden atmosphere in the room. "Your meeting with the Japanese delegation has been rescheduled for 3, Helen said, placing the cup on his desk. "And the lawyer Friedman called about the IRS case." "What did he say?" "That there are rumors that someone is providing information about your personal life to the investigators. Nothing compromising in business, but..." Alexander raised his eyes sharply. "But what?" Helen hesitated, her cheeks flushing slightly. "It seems they are investigating your relationships, looking for some personal vulnerability they can use as leverage." The implication hung in the air between them. Alexander stood up, walking to the window. "Helen, maybe it's better if you ask for a transfer to another department." "Why?" The question came out louder than she intended. "Because if they're investigating my personal life, you're going to be dragged into it too." "I don't care." "You should care." Alexander turned to face her. "You have no idea what these people are capable of doing." At that moment, the door opened without anyone knocking. Marcia entered with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, followed by a woman Helen had never seen. Elegant, blonde, wearing a Chanel suit that cost more than Helen's annual salary. "Alexander, darling," the woman said in a silky voice. "We need to talk." Alexander stiffened visibly. "Isabel, what are you doing here?" Helen felt her stomach clench. Isabel, the ex-fiancée that Alexander had vaguely mentioned as part of his painful past. "Introducing myself to your new assistant," Isabel said, examining Helen from head to toe with a calculating look. "Marcia told me about your special employee." Helen saw Alexander clench his fists. "Marcia, you're fired. You can clear out your desk." "Wait," Isabel raised her hand. "Marcia is working for me now, and she brought very interesting information." The secretary pulled the cell phone from her pocket, pressing play. Helen's voice echoed through the office. "And us?" followed by Alexander's response. "We'll see what happens." Helen's blood ran cold. It was the recording from the night she had accepted the job. "Very touching," Isabel commented, putting away the phone. "The powerful CEO and the poor cleaning lady. Like a modern fairy tale." "What do you want, Isabel?" Alexander asked, his voice dangerously low. "Justice. You destroyed Marcus, my fiancé, because of information he gave me in confidence. Now it's my turn to use information." Helen felt as if the floor were collapsing beneath her feet. "Marcus, the treacherous partner that Alexander had mentioned. Isabel had chosen Marcus over Alexander, and now she was here to take revenge. "You have two options, my love," Isabel continued, addressing Alexander. "First, you drop all charges against Marcus, pay compensation of $10 million, and I keep this compromising material to myself." "And the second option?" Alexander asked, although he already knew the answer. "I sell this story to all the tabloids in New York City. The billionaire CEO who fell in love with the cleaning lady, with photos, recordings, and some creative details about the nature of your relationship." Isabel smiled venomously. "I'm sure the press would love to know how you use your position to seduce vulnerable employees." Helen felt nauseous. The distortion was perfect. She would be painted as an opportunist who used her mother's illness to manipulate Alexander, while he would be portrayed as a predator who took advantage of desperate women. "That's a lie," Helen said, finding her voice. "Of course it is, darling," Isabel replied with full sympathy. "But well-told lies are more interesting than the truth, and I have very convincing evidence." Marcia opened a folder, spreading photos on the table. They were images of them talking in the office, but the angles and lighting made everything seem intimate, romantic, even sexual. The most compromising showed the moment when Alexander had touched Helen's face, but cropped in a way that looked like a kiss. "Photoshop is a wonderful tool," Isabel commented casually. Alexander approached the table, examining the photos with horror. "No one will believe this." "Oh, they will, especially when I tell them how you offered to pay for her mother's surgery in exchange for special favors. How you promoted her from cleaning lady to personal assistant overnight. How you stay alone in the office until late at night." Helen felt her legs buckle. The narrative was perfectly constructed, plausible enough to be believed, especially in a society that always assumed the worst about poor women who had relationships with rich men. "You have 48 hours to decide," Isabel said, collecting the photos. "Marcus free and 10 million, or both of you on the front page of every scandal newspaper in the country." She headed to the door, stopping for one last blow. "Oh, Helen, darling. I hope you enjoyed your princess moment, because if this story breaks, you'll never get a job in any reputable company in New York City again. Who will want to hire the woman who seduced the boss?" When they left, the silence in the office was deafening. Helen collapsed into the chair, trembling. "She's right," Helen murmured. "If this story gets out, my life is over. My mother will find out, my family. Everyone will think I'm a—" "Don't say that word," Alexander interrupted sharply. "Why? It's what everyone will think anyway." Alexander knelt in front of her, holding her hands. "Helen, look at me. We know the truth. That's what matters." "The truth?" Helen laughed bitterly. "What truth, Alexander? That you saved my mother out of pure kindness. That you gave me this job on merit. That there's nothing between us besides a professional relationship." Alexander was silent, because they both knew that she had touched on the central issue. "I have to get out of here," Helen said, getting up. "I have to go back to my real life before it's too late." "No." Alexander stood up too. "I'm not going to let you pay for my mistakes." "Then what are you going to do? Pay the 10 million? Let Marcus go free?" Alexander looked out the window at the city he had conquered, the empire he had built. For 20 years, he had fought to get where he was, but now, looking at Helen, he realized that none of it mattered if he lost her. "I don't know yet," he admitted, "but I'll find a way out." Helen stared at him for a long moment, memorizing his face. "If you really loved me," she said softly, "you'd let me go. Because staying will destroy both of us." Before Alexander could respond, she grabbed her bag and left the office, leaving him alone with the weight of an impossible choice, his empire or his heart. Alexander spent 2 sleepless nights trying to find a way out. He hired private investigators to look for evidence against Isabel, consulted his best lawyers about the legal options, even considered paying the 10 million. But every path led to the same dead end. Either he destroyed his company and freed a criminal, or Helen would pay the price for a love they had both tried to deny. On Thursday morning, April 4th, Alexander arrived at the office determined to confront Isabel. He wouldn't find Helen there. She had requested medical leave to take care of her mother, but they both knew it was a desperate attempt to protect herself from the approaching storm. It was 9 o'clock when Marcia appeared, at his door, no longer as his former secretary, but as Isabel's messenger. "She wants an answer, Mr. Blackwood. Tell her I need more time. She said you'd say that." Marcia smiled maliciously. "That's why she sent me to give you this." She threw a newspaper on the table. Alexander felt his blood run cold when he saw the headline of New York Gossip, a sensationalist tabloid, billionaire CEO in sex scandal with cleaning lady. The front page photo showed Helen entering Mount Sinai Hospital, clearly taken on the day of her mother's surgery, but the caption suggested something completely different. Helen Silver, 26, former cleaning lady who became Alexander Blackwood's special assistant after intimate encounters in the office. With trembling hands, Alexander opened the newspaper. The article was a work of malicious fiction, mixing real facts with venomous insinuations. It told about Helen's suspicious promotion, about the nightly encounters in the office, about how Alexander had financed expensive surgery for his mistress's mother. There was even a supposed statement from a source close to, claiming that Helen had boasted of having the boss in the palm of her hand. "This is just the beginning," Marcia said, clearly pleased with his reaction. "Tomorrow it comes out in Vanity Fair, then on TMZ. By the end of the week, the whole country will know your love story." Alexander crumpled the newspaper in fury. Where's Helen? Probably hiding at home, trying to escape the reporters who have already discovered her address. Alexander's heart raced. Helen lived in a boarding house in Washington Heights. There was no security, no privacy. If the tabloids had discovered where she lived. He grabbed his car keys and ran out, ignoring Marcia's shouts behind him. The trip to Washington Heights took an hour in the morning traffic. When Alexander arrived at Helen Street, he found exactly what he feared: a crowd of reporters and photographers surrounding the modest boarding house, cameras pointed at the windows. On the second floor, Alexander had to park 2 blocks away and walk. When the journalists recognized him, it was a frenzy. "Mr. Blackwood, is it true that you promised a promotion in exchange for sex? How do you feel knowing that your girlfriend only wanted your money? Are you going to marry her, or was it just a fling?" Alexander pushed through the crowd, ignoring the questions, trying to reach the door of the boarding house. Mrs. Irene, the owner, a 60-year-old woman, appeared at the door with a furious expression. "You! It's your fault, this whole mess. Where's Helen? Left this morning with 2 suitcases, said she was leaving New York City." Mrs. Irene crossed her arms. "Left this for you." She handed over a crumpled envelope. With trembling hands, Alexander opened it. Alexander. "By the time you read this, I'll be gone. I'm going to upstate New York, to my aunt's house. My mother is being transferred to a public hospital there. She doesn't want your help anymore after seeing the newspaper. I know you weren't to blame for the blackmail, but maybe this is for the best. We both knew it was impossible from the beginning. People like us live in different worlds, and when we try to cross that line, we only hurt the ones we love. Thank you for making me feel special, even if only for a short time. Thank you for showing me that I could be more than just the cleaning lady. I'll carry that with me forever. Don't try to find me. Please. It's better this way. With love, Helen P.S. I returned the company card and the clothes you bought. I can't take anything that reminds me of what I can't have." Alexander felt like he had been punched in the stomach. The words, "with love," seemed to stand out from the page, a final confession at the moment of farewell. "She cried all night," Mrs. Irene said, her voice softening a little. "I heard through the wall, a good girl, that Helen. She didn't deserve this humiliation." Alexander looked around. The reporters continued shouting questions. The cameras didn't stop flashing. Neighbors came out of their houses to see the commotion. Children pointed at him as if he were a zoo animal. That's what Helen had faced. The public humiliation, the judgment of strangers, the destruction of her privacy and dignity, all for having fallen in love with him. His phone rang. It was Dr. Edward Miles. "Alexander, I need to talk to you about the patient, Connie Silver." "What happened?" "She suffered a severe anxiety attack this morning after seeing the newspapers. She's hospitalized again. Her daughter brought her, but refused any treatment linked to your name. Said they'd rather die with dignity than accept dirty money." Alexander closed his eyes. Not only had he lost Helen, but his actions had put her mother's life at risk again. "Doctor, please do everything that's necessary. I'll pay, but don't. Let them know." "Alexander, maybe it's better to leave them alone for now." When he hung up the phone, Alexander felt completely defeated. He had lost the woman he loved, caused suffering to an innocent family, and for what? To protect an empire built on empty relationships and successes that now seemed insignificant. He returned to the car under the flashes of photographers, ignoring the questions that continued to rain down. On the passenger seat, he found a bag with the clothes he had bought for Helen and the company card, all carefully folded and organized, as she always did everything in her life. Inside the bag, there was one last note. "You told me once that I deserved more than life gave me. Maybe you also deserve more than you've chosen for yourself. Don't let the fear of being hurt again stop you from being happy." H. Alexander drove back to his office in silence, with a broken heart and the certainty that he had lost the only real thing he had ever had in his life. When he arrived at Blackwood Tower, he found Isabel waiting in his office, smiling like a cat that had just devoured a canary. "Did you like the first sample?" she asked, leafing through a magazine. "Tomorrow it comes out with even more details, photos of her house, interviews with neighbors. It's going to be delicious." "You got what you wanted," Alexander said, collapsing into the chair. "Helen is gone. Are you satisfied?" "Almost. There's still the matter of the 10 million and Marcus's release." Alexander stared at her with a coldness that made Isabel recoil slightly. "Forget the money. Forget Marcus. Do what you want with your story. I have nothing more to lose." "Are you sure about that? Your business reputation, your international contracts? They'll survive. They always do." Alexander stood up. "But you destroyed the only thing that really mattered. I hope it's worth living with that." Isabel left furiously, shouting threats about what she would do in the coming days. Alexander didn't care. Sitting alone in his office, looking at the cup of coffee that Helen had prepared for the last time, he finally understood what he had lost. It wasn't just a woman. It was the chance to be a better person. It was the possibility of loving and being loved genuinely. It was the opportunity to discover that he was worth more than his empire of glass and steel. And now it was too late. 3 weeks had passed since Helen had fled New York City. In the small town of Ithaca in upstate New York, she was trying to rebuild her life, working at her Aunt Martha's bakery, waking up at 4 in the morning to prepare breads and pastries that fed the local workers. The simple routine should have been a relief after the chaos of the city, but Helen felt like a ghost of herself. Her mother, Connie, had physically recovered from the anxiety attack, but something had broken inside her. The proud woman, who had always faced poverty head-on, now lived ashamed, convinced that her daughter had sold herself to a rich man. No explanation from Helen could change that perception. "Mom, I never did anything wrong," Helen tried to explain. For the 10th time that morning, while preparing coffee. "Alexander helped me because you're pretty and he's a man," Connie interrupted bitterly. "I'm not stupid, Helen. Rich men don't help poor women out of kindness. There's always a price." The words cut Helen like knives. It was exactly what the newspapers had insinuated, what the neighbors in New York whispered, what the whole country now believed about her. That day, April 25th, Helen was organizing the stock when Aunt Martha entered the bakery with a worried expression. "Helen, there's a woman here wanting to talk to you. Says she's a reporter, but she doesn't look like those vultures who showed up the first week." Helen felt her stomach clench. She had managed 3 weeks of peace, away from the photographers and the intrusive questions. "Tell her I'm not here. She said to give you this." Martha handed over an elegant business card. Marina Santos, The New Yorker magazine. Said she has information about what really happened in New York City. Helen hesitated. Marina Santos was a respected investigative journalist known for exposing political and corporate scandals. She wasn't the type who worked with tabloid gossip. 5 minutes later, Helen was sitting at a table in the back of the bakery, observing a 40-year-old woman, grey hair held in a bun, who looked more like a college professor than a sensationalist reporter. "Miss Silva, I know you must be tired of journalists, but I'm not like the others," Marina began, placing a recorder on the table. "I'm investigating a blackmail and manipulation scheme that involves your former boss and several other victims." "I'm not a victim of anything," Helen replied defensively. "No? Then explain to me why a hard-working, honest woman who never had problems with anyone suddenly becomes the center of a national scandal." Marina opened a folder, spreading documents on the table. Isabel Moreira, Alexander Blackwood's ex-fiancée. In the last 2 years, she and Marcus Henrique, his former partner, set up a sophisticated blackmail scheme. They identify people close to wealthy business leaders, create compromising situations, and then sell the stories to tabloids or use them for extortion. Helen examined the papers. There were photos of other women, a secretary, a junior lawyer, a physical therapist, all in similar situations, all publicly destroyed after becoming involved with powerful men. Isabel has a front company that provides public relations services to various companies. In fact, she plants strategic employees, collects compromising information, and then uses it all as a weapon. Are you saying she planned my meeting with Alexander? Not exactly. You met by chance. But when Marcia, who already worked for Isabel, realized that there was something between you, they saw a perfect opportunity for 2 blackmails for the price of 1. Marina showed bank statements. Marcia received $50,000 from Isabel's company the week the first articles came out. The photographers who discovered your address also paid by her. Helen felt a mixture of relief and fury rising in her chest. "But why are you telling me this now? Why didn't you stop it back then?" "Because I needed more evidence. And because..." Marina hesitated. "Because Alexander Blackwood contacted me." Helen's heart raced. "He hired me to investigate Isabel 3 days after you left New York City. He spent more than $500,000 on private investigators, ethical hackers, lawyers. He's obsessed with clearing your name. To protect his company." "No, Helen, to protect you." Marina pulled another document from the folder, a legal power of attorney. "He's suing all the tabloids for defamation. He's demanding a public retraction, and more importantly..." She paused dramatically. "He's donating all the money he wins from the lawsuits to a protection fund for victims of blackmail and media harassment." Helen felt tears burning her eyes. "He also discreetly paid for your mother's full treatment. The hospital in Ithaca received an anonymous donation that covers all her medical costs for the next 5 years." "How do you know this?" "Because I also investigated him. I wanted to make sure he wasn't another predator trying to clear his image." Marina smiled for the first time. "Helen, in the last 20 days, Alexander Blackwood has turned New York City upside down looking for you, hired detectives, put ads in upstate newspapers, even offered a reward for anyone who knew your whereabouts. Why? Because he's in love, and because he discovered that you were right. About him, about you, about everything." Marina picked up a sealed envelope from the folder. "He asked me to deliver this if I found you. Said that if you didn't want to see him after reading it, he would respect your decision, but that you deserved to know the truth." Helen took the envelope with trembling hands. Her name was written in the handwriting that she had learned to recognize in recent weeks as his assistant. "There's one more thing," Marina said, standing up. "Marcus Henrique was arrested yesterday. Fraud, blackmail, tax evasion. Isabel is on the run, but Interpol has issued an international warrant. Their scheme has completely collapsed." When Marina left, Helen was alone with the envelope, her heart beating so hard that it seemed to echo through the empty bakery. Outside, the simple life of Ithaca continued, cars passing slowly, children playing in the square, the church bell ringing noon. But inside that envelope was the truth that she had waited for weeks, and perhaps the key to a future that she had thought was lost forever. With trembling fingers, Helen tore the seal. Inside, there was a single sheet of paper and a bus ticket to New York City with an open date. The letter began with 2 words that made her world stop. My Helen. She took a deep breath, preparing to discover if the love she had felt was real or just another illusion in her life of lost illusions. Helen read the letter 3 times before she could fully process the words. My Helen. If you're reading this, Marina managed to find you. I hope you don't find it intrusive. I know you asked me not to look for you, but I couldn't live knowing that you believed the lies they spread about us. I've spent the last 3 weeks discovering who really destroyed our chance at happiness. Isabel and Marcus created a scheme that lasted for years, destroying innocent lives for revenge and money. You were just another victim of theirs, like me. But I discovered something more important. I discovered who I really am when I'm with you. For 40 days, you showed me that I could be more than a cold CEO. You taught me that wealth without love is just numbers in a bank account, that power without compassion is just tyranny in disguise. You were right when you said I had built walls, but you were also right when you said I deserved more than I chose for myself. You gave me that. More, Helen. You gave me the possibility of being human again. I'm not asking you to come back. I'm not promising it will be easy, but I'm asking for a chance to prove that what we felt was real, that it was worth fighting for. If you decide you want to try again, meet me where it all began. I'll be there every night at 4 a.m, waiting. If you decide it's best to move on, I'll understand. But know that you were never just the cleaning lady to me. You always were, and always will be, everything. With all my love. Alexander. Helen cried until she had no more tears. She cried for the unnecessary pain they had gone through, for Isabella's cruel manipulation, for the way the world had tried to reduce their love to a sordid transaction. But she also cried with relief because finally the truth had come to light. That night, she showed the letter to Aunt Martha, who hugged her tightly. Go, girl. True love doesn't give up at the first storm. But it was the conversation with her mother that sealed her decision. Connie, after reading the letter and the documents that Marina had left, held her daughter's hands with tears in her eyes. I misjudged you, my daughter. I thought I had failed in your education, that you had sold yourself for money. But you just fell in love, and with a man who truly loves you. Mom, go, fight for your love. I'll be fine here, and when you're ready, I want to meet this man my daughter has chosen. On the morning of April 28th, Helen took the bus to New York City with her heart beating erratically. The 6-hour trip seemed to last an eternity. When she finally arrived at the Port Authority bus terminal at 2 p.m, the city, that had been her home seemed different, louder, more aggressive, but also more alive. She went straight to the boarding house, where Mrs. Irene greeted her with a tight hug. I'm so glad you're back, girl. That man didn't stop coming here asking about you. Every day he brought flowers, even knowing you weren't here. Helen took a shower, put on the prettiest dress she had, a simple navy dress that she had bought with her first salary as an assistant, and waited. At 3:30 in the morning, she took a cab to Blackwood Tower. The building was almost empty, just the night security team and the cleaning staff. Helen went up to the 32nd floor with a temporary pass that the doorman, recognizing her, had kindly provided. The door to Alexander's office was open, and he was there, sitting in the same armchair where he had almost fainted on the first night they met, looking out the window at the city that was waking up. He looked thinner, tired, but when he saw her at the door, his eyes lit up in a way that made Helen's heart race. Helen. The name came out like a prayer. You said you'd be here every night. And I have been, every night for 3 weeks. They stared at each other across the office, 10 feet of distance that seemed like an abyss. I read your letter, Helen said, taking a step inside, and Marina showed me the evidence. So you know that. I know that you spent a fortune to clear my name. I know that you sued half the New York press. I know that my mother is protected for the rest of her life. she took another step. But I need to know one thing. Anything. When you touched me that night, when we almost kissed before Marcia appeared, did you already know you loved me? Alexander stood up, walking slowly towards her. I knew that you had changed my life since the first sandwich you shared with me. I knew that you were the first person in years who saw me as Alexander, not as the CEO. I knew that when I looked at you, I felt something that I thought had died inside me. They were now just 3 feet apart. But I only understood it was love when you left. When I realized that I'd rather lose everything than live without you. Alexander. Helen, I can't promise it will be easy. The world will judge us. There will always be those who say that you're with me for the money or that I take advantage of you. But I promise one thing. I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving that our love is real. For you, for the world, for myself. Helen felt the tears return, but this time they were tears of happiness. Do you still think of me as just the cleaning lady? Alexander smiled, reaching out to touch her face with the same gentleness as the first time. No, my love. You've never been just anything. You are everything. My everything. When they finally kissed, it was as if the world realigned. All the obstacles, all the pain, all the separation faded in the warmth of that moment. Helen felt complete for the first time in her life, not because she had won a rich man, but because she had found someone who loved her for who she really was. 6 months later, the newspapers that had previously destroyed her reputation were printing different headlines: CEO marries love of his life and The Real Fairy Tale of New York. The ceremony was simple, in the church in Ithaca, with the presence of Connie, completely recovered and proud of her daughter, Aunt Martha, and a few true friends. Alexander had insisted that it be in Helen's hometown, away from the spotlights of New York City. During the exchange of vows, Alexander looked into his bride's eyes and said, Helen, you taught me that true love doesn't see social classes, doesn't calculate costs and benefits, doesn't measure wealth. You showed me that sometimes the most valuable person is right in front of us, just waiting to be seen. I promise to see you, to value you, and to love you for the rest of my life. Helen, with tears of happiness, replied, Alexander, you showed me that I was worth more than I always believed, that I deserved to be loved not for what I could offer, but for who I was. You transformed my life not with money, but with true love. I promise to never hide in the shadows again, because by your side, I discovered that I can shine. When the priest declared them husband and wife, the whole church applauded. But for Helen and Alexander, there were only the two of them. Two souls who had met in the Manhattan dawn and discovered that true love can overcome any obstacle. Later, during the simple party in Aunt Martha's backyard, Alexander pulled Helen to dance under the upstate stars. Any regrets? He asked, twirling her gently. Helen smiled, looking at the man who had transformed her life not by the wealth he Otitoks possessed, but by the love he offered. None. And you? Just one, Alexander said, pulling her closer. Which one? I should have noticed you much sooner. 3 years lost in which we could have been happy. Helen kissed him softly. They weren't lost. They were necessary. I needed to be ready to believe that I deserved you, and you needed to be ready to see me. As they danced under the starry sky of upstate New York, far from the lights of New York City, but close to everything that really mattered, Helen and Alexander knew they had found something more valuable than all the money in the world. A love that saw them as they really were, and loved them exactly for that. And in the small town of Ithaca, among simple people who understood the value of true things, the cleaning lady and the CEO discovered that sometimes fairy tales happen in real life. You just need to be brave enough to believe that everyone deserves to be happy regardless of where their stories began.